Let's have a look at patterns and relationships. I have a pattern here. It's a pattern of dots, and there are several things that we can do with patterns. We can first of all continue a pattern. We can also create a table of values whereby we can actually formalize the pattern by entering numbers into the table. We can also graph the relationship with this pattern or with patterns, and we can also come up with a rule or an equation which describes the pattern. So the first thing we want to do is continue a pattern. So what would pattern 5 look like? So it would look like this. So you can see that we are adding 2 dots each time. So each branch of this pattern gets a dot at the end of each of those branches. The next thing we can do is just create a table of values using this pattern. And the first column in the table will always be the pattern number. So if we're just looking at pattern number 1, that is what we call the first term. So the first term is how many dots is in that pattern. So there are 3. So pattern number 1 has 3 dots. Pattern number 2 would be called the second term. So the second term has how many dots in it? It has 5. So each of these numbers here is called a term. So the third term would be 7. So just counting the dots. The fourth term, or in the fourth pattern, we have 9 dots. And then you can just continue. You can sort of see that we're adding 2 each time. And I've added a third column here, which we call the first differences. So we're looking at the difference between each successive term. So when I go from 3 to 5 dots, I'm actually adding 2. So from there to there, I add 2. Then to go from pattern number 2 to pattern number 3, that is going from 5 dots to 7 dots, I also add 2. So you can see as you progress through that you're adding 2 each time. So we call this the first difference. That is, this is the first difference between each successive term. So the difference is plus 2 because we're adding 2 each term or between each term. We can now also graph this relationship. So what's the relationship between the pattern number and the number of dots? So if I just scroll down to my grid here, so it looks like this. So pattern number will always go along the horizontal axis. And for pattern number 1, I know there are 3 dots. So I go to 1 and then up to 3 and just put a point there. Pattern number 2, there are 5 dots. So go along to 2 and up to 5. Pattern number 3, there are 7 dots. So along to 3 and up to 7. And then just continue the pattern. So 4, pattern number 4, 9 dots. Pattern number 5, 11 dots. And you can continue that pattern. Now although it's you'd like to draw a line through these points, don't for this particular example, because we're actually looking at whole numbers. These whole numbers are the number of dots, so we don't join these points, we just leave the graph like that. Now what you can see is 2 things. If the first difference is the same each time, and when you draw when you graph this relationship, you get a straight line, then we call this relationship a linear relationship. Linear relationship. Because if you graph it, you get a straight line. We will now come up with a rule that describes this relationship between the number of dots and the pattern number. So say we wanted to find the number of dots in any pattern number. Okay, so our relationship or our rule will start with the number of dots. So how do we work that out? Number of dots is equal to, and we're going to use the first difference. So since the first difference is plus 2, then we're going to multiply the pattern number by that first difference. And this is the beginning of our rule. And we always do that. Whatever the first difference is, as long as that first difference is the same each time, we always multiply the pattern number by the first difference. So number of dots is equal to pattern number multiplied by 2 and I have redone another table just below here, and let's have a look at what happens when we multiply the pattern number by 2. So as you can see, here is the pattern number in yellow, the number of dots in orange, and the first difference in green. So I've introduced another column here, and I've called it the pattern number times 2. So what happens each time I multiply the pattern number by 2? So 1 times 2, so the pattern number of 1 times the first difference of 2 will give me 2. Now, if you go back to the original number of dots, I actually need 3 dots in that first pattern. Here, when I multiply the pattern number by 2, I only get 2. So to get 3 dots, I need to add 1. Let's have a look at the second pattern. So the second pattern number, which is 2, times that first difference, which is also 2. 2 times 2 is 4. If I go back to my original number of dots, I actually need 5 dots in that second pattern. This equation here, I'm only getting 4, so I need to add 1. So you can see each time I multiply the pattern number by the first difference, I get a number which is 1 less than what I'm really after. So I need to add 1 each time. So the rest of our rule, if I go back up to here, the rest of our rule states that we need to add 1. Add 1. So this rule will give us the number of dots for whatever pattern number. Finally, we can write an equation from this rule. So if I call the number of dots, if I call that D, okay, so number of dots is D, and if I call the pattern number N, then D, from my rule, D is equal to N times 2 plus 1, which if I were to rewrite that would look like this, 2n plus 1. So that would be my actual equation. And from my equation, I can work out things like how many dots are there in pattern 18. So from my equation, number of dots is equal to 2 times 18, so pattern number 18, plus 1. So that would give me 36 plus 1, which is equal to 37. So 37 dots in pattern number 1. I can also work out the pattern number. So if I have, let's say, 49 dots, what pattern number is that? So you need to work out what pattern number is that. You can use the equation as well. So D is equal to 2n plus 1 I know what D is, it's 49. So 49 is equal to 2n plus 1. So from our work in algebra, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I end up with 48 equals 2n, and then dividing both sides by 2. On the left, I get 24 is equal to n. So the pattern number 24 has 49 dots. So that's how we can use an equation which has been created from the rule to find out other information about the pattern.